I'm sorry, but this is one of the worst ideas we've ever seen on this show." The words rang out like a gunshot in the silent studio. The audience gasped. The cameras zoomed in on his face, his dream, his confidence, shattered in real time. Mike Reynolds stood frozen on the Shark Tank stage, his throat dry, his fingers clenching the pitch deck he had spent years perfecting. He had walked in with high hopes, believing that today would be the moment that changed his life. Instead, he was standing under the scorching lights, being ripped apart by the very people he had admired for years. Kevin O'Leary leaned back in his chair and smirked. "Mike, let's be real here. Nobody in their right mind would invest in this. I'd rather set my money on fire." The other sharks chuckled. Mark Cuban sighed and shook his head. "Honestly, man, you're wasting your time. There's nothing unique about this. No customer base, no demand. I don't see how this could ever work." Lori Grainer glanced at the prototype on the table. "I don't even think this is safe," she added. "If you ever do sell it, I'd be worried about lawsuits." Mike's jaw tightened. His heart pounded in his ears. He had spent everything, his savings, his time, his sleepless nights on this. And now, in front of millions of people watching from their homes, he was being humiliated. "I think we're done here," Kevin said, leaning forward. "You came in asking for $200,000 for 10% of a company that, let's face it, isn't even worth $10. Mike, you're dead to me. I'm out." The words hit harder than he expected. One by one, the sharks backed out. No offers. No negotiations. Just brutal, public rejection. As he turned to leave the stage, he forced himself to hold his head high, but inside, he felt like crumbling. He had walked in believing he was about to become the next big entrepreneur. Instead, he was walking out feeling like a fool. The moment the studio doors closed behind him, he let out a shaky breath. The cameras were off him now, but the damage was done. His dream, his big idea, was trashed. Or so they thought. Because what nobody knew, not the sharks, not the audience, not even Mike himself, was that this humiliating moment would be the spark that set off a fire. A fire that would lead him back to this very room, years later, not as a desperate entrepreneur begging for an investment, but as something far greater. A shark. But how did he get there? What happened in the years after that disastrous pitch? Let's go back to where it all began. The drive home was quiet. Too quiet. Mike gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, his jaw clenched so hard it hurt. His fiancée, Sarah, sat beside him, her lips pressed into a thin line. "They humiliated me," he finally muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah turned to him, her eyes filled with something he hadn't expected, determination. "No," she said firmly. "They challenged you." Mike let out a bitter laugh. "Sarah, they laughed me off the stage." "Dead to me." "That's what Kevin said." He shook his head. "I'm a joke." She reached over and took his hand. "Only if you quit." Mike didn't respond. He wanted to believe her, but the sting of rejection was still too fresh. The worst part? The show hadn't even aired yet. Once it did, the whole world would see his failure. A month later, the episode finally aired. Mike sat on his couch, watching himself get shredded on national television. He braced himself for the messages, the comments, the online ridicule. And sure enough, they came. This guy really thought he had something? Face with tears of joy. Cringiest pitch of the season. Dude's face when Mr. Wonderful said, "You're dead to me." Priceless. Mike slammed his laptop shut. But just as he was about to give up and move on, his phone buzzed. A new message. It was from an unknown number. "Hey, I saw your pitch on Shark Tank. I actually think your idea isn't as bad as they made it seem. You just went about it the wrong way. Call me if you're still serious about it." Attached was a name, Ryan Carter. Mike frowned. He didn't recognize the name. But something told him not to ignore it. Ryan Carter was an entrepreneur and product consultant, a man who had been behind the scenes of several successful startups. The first time they met in person, Mike immediately felt like he was talking to someone who saw what others didn't. "You went in there asking for money," Ryan said, sipping his coffee. "Big mistake. The moment they saw you needed them, they smelled blood." Mike sighed. I did need them. No, you didn't, Ryan corrected. What you needed was proof. Validation. Real numbers. He leaned forward. Listen, I've worked with brands that were way worse than yours, and they made millions. You don't have a bad idea, Mike. You just pitched it too soon. Mike blinked. You really think my idea can work? Ryan smirked. I don't think. I know. And just like that, something ignited in Mike's chest. Hope. He wasn't dead yet. Not even close. The next year was brutal. Mike worked harder than ever before, but this time, he had a strategy. He took Ryan's advice and completely rebranded his product. Instead of trying to get investors, he focused on customers. He built an online store. He ran social media ads. He studied every piece of negative feedback from Shark Tank and used it to improve his product. Slowly, painfully, sales started trickling in. $200 in the first month. $1,500 in the second. By month 6, he was making $10,000 a month. It wasn't enough to quit his day job, but it was enough to prove one thing: his product wasn't a failure. The sharks had been wrong, and he was about to prove it to the world. But just as things were starting to go right, something happened that threatened to destroy everything. Mike woke up to dozens of missed calls. His website had been shut down. Someone had filed a legal complaint against his company. A shark had come after him. But why? And who? Mike's heart pounded as he read the email from his lawyer. Cease and desist notice from Grainer Enterprises. Lori. She had told him on Shark Tank that his product might not be safe. Now, she was making sure the world believed it. And if he didn't act fast, his business, the one he fought so hard to build, was going to be wiped out before it even took off. Mike's hands trembled as he held his phone, rereading the email over and over. A cease and desist notice? From Lori Grainer? It didn't make sense. She had rejected his idea on Shark Tank. Laughed at it. So why was she coming after him now? Mike immediately called Ryan. Dude, Mike blurted out the second Ryan answered. Lori Grainer's trying to shut me down. There was a pause on the other end. Then Ryan let out a slow breath. All right. Send me the email. Let's see what we're dealing with. Mike forwarded it and waited, his heart pounding in his chest. A minute later, Ryan whistled through the speaker. This is bad, he muttered. Mike's stomach sank. Define bad. She's claiming your product is a safety hazard and that you're misleading customers. If this sticks, your site could be permanently taken down. You could even be sued. Mike clenched his jaw. This is personal, isn't it? Maybe. Maybe not, Ryan replied. It could be a power move. She might have realized you're actually onto something and doesn't want competition. Mike's pulse quickened. That would mean one thing: his product was good enough to be a threat. And if it was a threat, it meant he was on the right track. But first, he had to survive. The next few weeks were chaos. Mike hired a lawyer. He dug up every legal document he could find to prove that his product was safe and legit. Lori's team claimed his product violated safety regulations, so Mike went and got it officially tested and certified. She claimed he was using false advertising, so Mike updated his marketing, making everything crystal clear. For every move she made, he countered. It was exhausting, expensive, but failure wasn't an option. And finally, after 2 grueling months, his lawyer called with the news he had been waiting for. They dropped the complaint. Mike exhaled, sinking into his chair. He had won. For the first time since his humiliating Shark Tank rejection, he had won. But the war wasn't over. If Lori saw him as a threat now, what would happen when his business really took off? There was only one way to find out. He had to grow bigger. Mike doubled down. He expanded his online store. He hired a small team. He got influencers to promote his product. And it worked. Sales exploded. $50,000 a month. $100,000 a month. Within a year, his company crossed $1 million in revenue. The same product that was trashed on Shark Tank was now making him more money than most of the sharks had offered to invest. And that's when the call came. A familiar voice on the other end of the line. Mike, it's Mark Cuban. Mike nearly dropped his phone. Mark Cuban, calling him. "I've been watching what you're doing," Mark continued. "I think we should talk." Mike swallowed hard. A year ago, the sharks laughed at him. No. One of them was calling him. But why? And more importantly, was this a trap? Mike's heart pounded as he stared at his phone. Mark Cuban. Mark freaking Cuban was calling him. A year ago, he had walked off the Shark Tank stage humiliated, with every single shark rejecting him. Now, one of them was reaching out. But why? He took a breath and answered. "Mike," Mark's voice came through smoothly. "Been watching you. You've made some serious moves since Shark Tank." Mike forced himself to sound calm. "Yeah, well, had to prove you guys wrong." Mark chuckled. "And you did. Listen, let's cut to the chase. I see what you're doing, and I think there's an opportunity here. If you're interested, I'd like to sit down and talk investment." Mike froze. Investment? The same sharks who trashed his idea were now offering to invest? Something about it felt off. He cleared his throat. "With all due respect, Mark." "Why now?" A pause. "Because you're winning, Mike," Mark finally said. "And I like to bet on winners." Mike glanced at his laptop screen, where his company dashboard displayed the latest numbers. 1.2 million in revenue. He was winning. But was he willing to let the same people who rejected him buy their way back in? "I'll think about it," Mike said carefully. "Smart," Mark replied. "But don't take too long. Because I guarantee you, I'm not the only one watching." The call ended. Mike sat there, staring at his phone, a storm of emotion swirling in his chest. Ryan's reaction was immediate. "Don't do it," he said, shaking his head. "You don't need them." Mike sighed. "I know. But this isn't just anyone. It's Mark Cuban." "Yeah. And where was Mark Cuban when you needed him?" Ryan shot back. "When you were begging for an investment on that stage, they all said no. Now that you're making money, suddenly they want in." Mike frowned. What if he actually believes in the company now? Ryan folded his arms. Or what if he just wants a cut before you get even bigger? That hit Mike hard. Ryan was right. He had built this company on his own. Every dollar, every sale, every success, he had made it happen. The sharks weren't there when he was struggling. They weren't there when Lori tried to shut him down. So why should he let them in now? He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. This was a defining moment. If he said yes, he'd gain a powerful investor, but he'd also be giving up control. If he said no, he'd be sending a message. That night, Mike sat at his desk, staring at his laptop screen. He pulled up his company website, his brand, his vision. Then, he opened his email and typed a simple response to Mark Cuban. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm doing just fine without the sharks." And with that, he hit send. Mike thought that would be the end of it. But the next morning, he woke up to a flood of emails. News articles, social media posts, headlines exploding across the internet. Rejected on Shark Tank, now worth millions, and he just turned down Mark Cuban. The story went viral. And the moment it did, something happened that nobody expected. Sales skyrocketed. By the end of the month, his company wasn't just worth $1 million. It was on its way to 8 figures. But success always attracts enemies. And Mike was about to find out. The sharks weren't done with him yet. Mike could barely keep up. His phone buzzed non-stop. Orders were flooding in at a rate he had never seen before. Overnight, his decision to reject Mark Cuban had turned him into an internet legend. Entrepreneurs admired him. Customers trusted him. And investors, they were begging to get in. But as fast as he was rising, something was wrong. Something big. It started with delays. His suppliers, who had always been reliable, suddenly struggled to meet demand. Shipments were late. Orders piled up. Then, his ads got flagged. His biggest marketing campaign, one that had been running smoothly for months, was suddenly shut down for policy violations. And then came the worst blow. His payment processor froze his funds. Millions of dollars in sales, and he couldn't access a single penny. It felt like a coordinated attack. But by who? Mike sat in his office, his head in his hands. His company was growing faster than he ever imagined, but now it was like someone was trying to choke him out. Ryan stormed in, laptop in hand. "Mike, you're not gonna believe this." He spun the screen around. On it was an email chain. A leak from an industry insider. It showed that a shark had been making calls behind the scenes. Not Mark. Not Laurie. It was Kevin O'Leary. Mr. Wonderful himself. And he had been pulling strings to shut Mike down. Mike felt a cold rage settle in his chest. This guy rejected me. Humiliated me. And now he's trying to kill my company. Ryan nodded grimly. "Think about it. You embarrassed them, Mike. You proved them wrong. And worst of all, you're making money without them." Mike's fists clenched. He had worked too hard. Fought too long. He wasn't about to let anyone, not a shark, not a billionaire, nobody, take this away from him. It was time to hit back. First, he called his suppliers directly. No middlemen. No excuses. He paid them up front to secure production. Next, he hired a legal team to fight the payment freeze. If Kevin was pulling strings, Mike was about to pull his own. And then, he went public. He told his story. He went on podcasts, gave interviews, posted on social media. He exposed everything. The rejection, the sabotage, the real reason the sharks were after him. And the internet exploded. Shark Tank tried to ruin him. Now he's fighting back. Kevin O'Leary's secret moves to crush a former contestant. The entrepreneur who said no to the sharks and won. Millions of views. Millions of shares. And as the story spread, so did his sales. By the end of the next quarter, his company wasn't just surviving. It had just crossed $10 million. Kevin O'Leary had tried to bury him. Instead, Mike was bigger than ever. But he wasn't done yet. Because he had just decided on his next move. Something no one saw coming. He was going to return to Shark Tank. But not as a contestant. As a shark. If you're loving this story, hit that like button. Drop a comment below. What would you have done in Mike's shoes? And tell us where you're watching from. Mike sat in his office, staring at his laptop screen. On it was an official email from the producers of Shark Tank. They wanted him back. But this time, not as a contestant. As a guest shark. The irony was delicious. The same show that mocked him. The same sharks that laughed at him. The same stage where he had walked off humiliated. No. They were inviting him back. And Mike had no intention of playing nice. Ryan grinned when he heard the news. "Dude, this is your moment. The ultimate comeback." Mike nodded slowly. "Yeah. But I need to do this right." He wasn't just going back for revenge. He was going back to prove a point. The game had changed. Entrepreneurs didn't need the sharks anymore. They just needed belief, strategy, and execution. Mike was going to walk onto that stage as the living proof of that. And he was going to make damn sure they knew it. The day of the taping arrived. Mike stood backstage, microphone clipped, cameras rolling. His heart pounded in his chest. Not with fear, but with excitement. A stagehand motioned for him. "All right, Mike. You're up." He walked out. The studio was exactly how he remembered it. The bright lights. The towering investor chairs. The cameras capturing every second. And there they were. The sharks. Mark Cuban. Laurie Grainer. Kevin O'Leary. Their eyes widened slightly as he took his seat among them. Mike smiled. "Miss me?" The first few pitches were business as usual. Entrepreneurs walked in. They pitched. The sharks negotiated. But then, a contestant stepped forward that made Mike sit up. A young entrepreneur. A kid, maybe 19 or 20. And the moment he started speaking, Mike saw himself in that kid. Passionate. Nervous. Hopeful. The same way he had been years ago. And then, it happened. The sharks started tearing into him. Kevin O'Leary sighed. "This is a waste of time." Laurie Grainer shook her head. "I just don't see it." Mark Cuban leaned forward. You don't have the numbers, kid. Mike could see the entrepreneur breaking. His confidence crumbling, just like Mike's had. And that's when he did something no guest shark had ever done before. He cut the other sharks off. "All right, enough," Mike said. Silence. The room turned to him. The young entrepreneur froze. Mike leaned forward. "Listen to me, kid. You're standing exactly where I stood years ago. And these guys, they trashed my idea too." The other sharks shifted in their seats. "But guess what?" Mike continued. "I walked out of here with nothing. No deal. No investment. Just a rejection." He let that hang in the air. "And I turned that rejection into a $10 million business." Gasps from the audience. Mike turned to the young entrepreneur. "You don't need them. You just need to prove them wrong." Kevin O'Leary smirked. "So what are you saying, Mike? You're going to invest in him?" Mike locked eyes with Kevin. "I'm saying, I'll match any offer you make." Kevin's smirk vanished. Mark Cuban raised an eyebrow. Lori Grainer stayed silent. Mike turned back to the entrepreneur. "You in?" The young entrepreneur swallowed hard, then nodded. Mike extended his hand. The deal was made. And just like that, Mike Reynolds became the first contestant in Shark Tank history to return as a shark and invest in someone just like him. As the cameras stopped rolling, Kevin O'Leary approached him. "Ballsy move," Kevin said, arms crossed. Mike smiled. "You told me I was dead to you. Guess I came back to life." Kevin chuckled. "Looks like you did." Then, after a pause, he added, "I was wrong about you." Mike tilted his head. "You were wrong about a lot of people." And with that, he walked off the stage. No longer a desperate entrepreneur, but a shark. Mike walked out of the Shark Tank studio that day with a feeling he couldn't quite put into words. It wasn't just victory. It wasn't just revenge. It was proof. Proof that every rejection, every failure, and every moment of doubt had led him right here. But this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. Because while he had made history as the first contestant to return as a shark, he was about to make an even bigger move. A move that would shake up the entire business world. Back in his office, Mike sat with Ryan, reviewing numbers. "Shark Tank gave us a boost," Ryan said, scrolling through the data. "Sales are up 300% in the last week." Mike nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. "It's not enough." Ryan looked up. "Not enough. Mike, we just did $10 million last year. We're on track to double that." Mike tapped his fingers on the desk. "We didn't come this far just to double our business." Ryan narrowed his eyes. "What are you thinking?" Mike leaned forward. "We don't just build a company. We build a legacy." Ryan exhaled. "Okay. I'm listening." Mike pulled up a list of startups on his screen. Every year, thousands of entrepreneurs get rejected on Shark Tank. Not because their ideas are bad, but because they don't fit the shark's mold. He looked up. "What if we gave them a second chance?" Ryan's eyes widened. "Wait, you're not saying—" Mike nodded. "I'm launching my own investment firm." Ryan sat back, shaking his head in amazement. "Damn, Mike." Mike smirked. "We're not just making millions anymore. We're making sharks." Word spread fast. Mike Reynolds, once mocked on Shark Tank, was now starting his own investment company. And unlike Shark Tank, he wasn't looking for polished businesses. He was looking for the underdogs. The rejects. The ones just like him. And within weeks, applications started flooding in. Hundreds. Then thousands. Entrepreneurs who had been laughed at. Rejected. Ignored. Mike read every single one. And he knew this was bigger than just him. This was a movement. One night, as he was reviewing another pitch deck, his phone buzzed. An unknown number. He picked up. "This is Mike." A voice came through. "Mike, it's Mark Cuban." Mike raised an eyebrow. "What can I do for you, Mark?" Mark chuckled. "I'll get straight to the point. I've been watching what you're doing. This new investment firm of yours? It's interesting." Mike smirked. "That's so." Mark continued. You're onto something big. And I want in. Mike's heart pounded. Mark Cuban, one of the most legendary investors in the game, wanted to partner with him. But was this a real offer? Or was this another move to control him? Mike took a breath. Mark, he said slowly, you know I don't need your money, right? Mark chuckled again. I know. But you might need my connections. Mike tapped his fingers against the desk. Was this the ultimate full-circle moment? Or was this a trap? One thing was clear. The game had just changed. And Mike was about to make his biggest decision yet. Mike leaned back in his chair, staring at his phone. Mark Cuban. The Mark Cuban, one of the same sharks who rejected him, was now offering to partner with him. Ryan, sitting across the desk, watched him carefully. This could be huge. Mike nodded. Yeah, but why now? Ryan shrugged. Because you're a threat. Because you're building something the sharks can't control. And Mark, he's the smart one. He sees where this is going. Mike exhaled, running a hand through his hair. If I take his offer, we get instant credibility, access to the biggest players in the industry. But Ryan finished his sentence. But you also give up some control. Mike stared at his phone, Mark's number still on the screen. If he said yes, he could scale faster than ever. If he said no, he'd be proving, once again, that he didn't need the sharks. And that's when he realized something. He wasn't the desperate entrepreneur anymore. He wasn't the guy begging for a deal. He was the one making the calls now. Mike tapped his fingers against the desk, then made his decision. He hit dial. Mark answered almost immediately. Mike took a deep breath. I appreciate the offer, Mark. I really do. He paused. But I'm going to have to pass. Silence. Then, a chuckle. You sure? Mike smiled. Yeah. Because I'm building something bigger than Shark Tank. Mark let out a slow whistle. Gotta say, Mike, I respect it. Mike leaned forward. Then let's call it what it is. You guys got it wrong. You passed on me. And now, I'm doing what you should have done. Mark didn't argue. He didn't make another offer. Instead, he simply said, "Good luck, Mike," and hung up. Ryan was staring at him. You really just turned down Mark Cuban? Mike smirked. Damn right I did. Ryan let out a laugh. Man, you're playing a different game now. Mike nodded. Yeah. And it's one I'm winning. The decision made headlines. Entrepreneur who rejected Shark Tank now rejects Mark Cuban. Mike Reynolds just declined the deal of a lifetime. Here's why. Did he just outsmart the sharks again? And the best part? His investment firm exploded. Applications tripled. Media outlets wanted interviews. And entrepreneurs across the country started seeing him as their shark. Not a billionaire sitting on a throne. Not someone who laughed at struggling founders. But one of them. Mike had gone from the rejected to the one choosing. And he wasn't stopping there. Because he had one final move left. A move that would shake up Shark Tank forever. He was going to buy a stake in the show itself. Ryan's jaw dropped when Mike told him, "Wait, you want to buy part of Shark Tank?" Mike grinned. Yeah. Think about it. They made millions off the backs of entrepreneurs. But how many rejected founders actually got a second chance? Ryan sat back. If you pull this off, Mike's grin widened. Then I don't just beat the sharks. I own the tank. The plan was crazy. Insane. But so was everything else he had done. And every time the world doubted him, he proved them wrong. No. It was time to do it one more time. Mike sat at the conference table, his hands clasped together. Across from him, the executives behind Shark Tank. Producers. Network heads. Lawyers. The people who controlled the show. And today, they were here to discuss his offer. An offer so bold, so unprecedented, that it had the entire business world watching. Mike Reynolds, the contestant they once laughed off the stage, was now trying to buy a stake in Shark Tank itself. The room was silent. Then, the lead executive, a man named Richard Caldwell, cleared his throat. "Mr. Reynolds," he said, his voice measured, "I have to admit, We didn't see this coming. Mike smiled. That's the thing about underdogs. You never see them coming. Caldwell folded his hands. You want a stake in Shark Tank. A show that rejected you. A show that, let's be honest, helped turn you into what you are today. Mike nodded. Exactly. And that's why this makes sense. Caldwell exchanged looks with the other execs. Why would we sell? Mike leaned forward. Because I can bring something no other shark can. Caldwell raised an eyebrow. And what's that? Mike smirked. The people. The execs stayed silent, waiting. Mike continued. Look, Shark Tank is legendary. But let's be real, it's losing its edge. People are tired of watching the same billionaires reject hungry entrepreneurs. He let his words sink in. I'm not a billionaire. I'm them. The guy who got knocked down, humiliated, counted out. He gestured toward himself. And yet, here I am. Bigger than ever. Caldwell exhaled. So what exactly are you offering? Mike slid a folder across the table. Ownership. Equity. And in return, I bring the next generation of sharks to the show. The execs flipped through the proposal. Mike could see doubt in some of their eyes. But he also saw interest. He had their attention. No. He just had to close. After an hour of negotiations, Caldwell finally sighed. All right, Mike, he said. We'll consider it. But we're not making any promises. Mike smiled. That's fine. I'm patient. Caldwell stood up, offering a handshake. If we do this, you won't just be a guest shark anymore. He paused. You'll be a real one. Mike took his hand. I already am. The news broke the internet. Rejected Shark Tank contestant now buying a stake in the show. Mike Reynolds is changing the game, again. Shark Tank's future. Is a new era coming? And then, just days after the story went viral, Mike got another call. A number he never expected. He answered. Mike, it's Kevin O'Leary. Mike raised an eyebrow. Didn't expect to hear from you. Kevin chuckled. Business is full of surprises. Mike leaned back. So what's this about? A pause. Then, Kevin's voice turned serious. If you're going to be a shark, you need to know something. Mike frowned. Know what? Kevin's voice was calm. The sharks don't just invest in companies. We protect our territory. Silence. Mike sat up. Is that a threat? Kevin chuckled. It's a warning. If you step into this world, you better be ready. Because we don't plan on making it easy for you. Mike's grip tightened on his phone. He had spent years fighting against them. No. He was about to fight from within. And he wouldn't just win. He was going to change the game forever. Mike sat in his high-rise office, staring out at the city below. Kevin O'Leary's words still echoed in his mind. The sharks don't just invest in companies. We protect our territory. It wasn't just a warning. It was a line in the sand. They saw him as an outsider, an intruder. And now, they were going to test him. But what they didn't realize, Mike Reynolds had never backed down from a fight. And he wasn't about to start now. The official announcement came 2 weeks later. Mike Reynolds was now a co-owner of Shark Tank. The internet exploded. From rejected contestant to Shark Tank investor, the ultimate comeback. Mike Reynolds is changing Shark Tank, and the old sharks aren't happy. Did he just outsmart the entire tank? But behind the scenes, the real battle was just beginning. Mike arrived on set for his first season as a full-time shark. The energy was different. The air felt hostile. The other sharks, Mark Cuban, Lori Grainer, Kevin O'Leary, greeted him with smiles. But Mike could tell. The smiles weren't real. This wasn't just business. This was personal. They wanted to see him fail. And Mike, he was about to prove them wrong, again. The cameras rolled. The first entrepreneur walked in. She was young, nervous. Her idea, a revolutionary smart home product. Mike listened carefully. And then, the sharks attacked. Kevin sighed. Look, this is a terrible business model. Lori frowned. I don't see how this is scalable. Mark Cuban shook his head. You don't have the margins. I'm out. The entrepreneur's confidence shattered in real time. Mike saw himself in her. The same rejection. The same doubt. And in that moment, he made his move. Mike leaned forward. Listen, he said. I've been exactly where you are. I know what it's like to be told, you're not good enough. He glanced at Kevin. I know what it's like to be told, you're dead to me. The room went silent. Kevin's smirk faded. Mike turned back to the entrepreneur. But let me tell you what I also know. He leaned in. They were wrong about me. And they're wrong about you. The entrepreneur's eyes widened. Mike smiled. I'm making you an offer. He glanced at the other sharks. And I don't need their approval. The deal was done. Mike had just made his first solo investment as a shark. And the moment the cameras cut, Kevin O'Leary walked up to him. Interesting play, Kevin said. But let's see if you can keep up. Mike smirked. Oh, Kevin, he said, I'm just getting started. That night, Mike got one last call. An unknown number. He answered. A voice came through the line. Mike, we need to talk. Mike frowned. Who is this? A pause. Then, the voice said, It's Damon John. Mike's eyes widened. Damon, the original Underdog shark. The one who had built Fubu from nothing. And now, he was calling Mike. But why? The screen cuts to black. To be continued. What do you think Damon John wants? Should Mike trust him? Drop a comment below. And if you loved this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more.